according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." While he was saying these things to them, suddenly a leader of the synagogue came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. Then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she said to herself, "If only I touch his cloak, I will be made well." Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." And instantly the woman was made well. When Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl got up. And the report of this spread throughout that district. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Fun fact about the scripture readings today. They have not shown up in the lectionary in over 10 years.
Wow.
This is because of when Easter falls and when Advent begins, and the length of ordinary season in between the two, which began just last week. It's also because of how the calendar has laid out. These specific readings have not been a part of the lectionary for over 10 years. Just another quick side note, the lectionary, officially called the Revised Common Lectionary, is a selection of scripture readings laid out in a schedule rotating through a 3-year cycle of A, B, and C. Therefore, every 3 years we read the same lessons. Right now we are in year A, and the new season begins in Advent. There are other ways that scripture is organized for churches, like the narrative lectionary, but most Protestant churches follow the Revised Common Lectionary. So now that we're done with our little tutorial, you might be thinking, but I've heard this story of the hemorrhaging woman before, or Jesus eating with sinners and tax collectors. I remember them. This is true because they show up in the Gospel of Mark as well. And I'm assuming some of you have been coming to church for more than 10 years, so you probably have heard them. But today, we hear the story from Matthew. I think it's common when we read or hear stories from the Bible to relate ourselves to the best people in the story, or even feel like we are observers, not connected to anyone specifically in the story. And I think that our relationship with Scripture changes when we try to imagine ourselves as part of the story, experiencing what people in Scripture were going through. So let's take a minute and imagine these different roles. As usual, Jesus is met with confrontation for pushing the boundaries and expanding people's ideas of what is right and wrong. First off, he has invited Matthew, a tax collector, to be his 12th disciple. Tax collectors were not liked because of how they did business with others. In order to get paid well, they charged over the amount of taxes being collected to take a little bit off the top. They were not seen as respectable by other religious leaders, just like the Pharisees. But on top of that, Jesus' other disciples were fishermen, and they also would not have wanted to be in relationship with a tax collector who was going to impose taxes on them. Jesus then goes on to eat with Matthew and these other tax collectors and friends and other sinners. And after this, Jesus heals a hemorrhaging woman, which means she's not just a lowly member of society because she is a woman, but also she is unclean because she is menstruating. And her menstruation isn't regular, and therefore she is basically continuing to bleed all the time, making her constantly unclean. Finally, Jesus heals a dead girl who would also have been unclean because she was dead when Jesus touched her, and not to mention the fact that she was female. As we know, he brings her back to life, and then that message spreads throughout the community. If you didn't know, touching someone who was unclean would make you unclean yourself. But with Jesus, it was different. Jesus healed them. In life, Jesus is the one we want to emulate, but picturing ourselves as Jesus might be a little harder. Jesus is the leader and is challenged by others because of his actions. It is often difficult to be the leader because, as the leader, you're responsible for dealing with the hard stuff. And it's even harder to be the leader when you are pushing people to expand their understanding or beliefs by doing things or saying things that they don't agree with. What would it be like to be healed by Jesus? We don't know if the woman, the girl, or her dad shared what happened to them after being healed. We know that the message of Jesus healing the little girl spread, but we don't know how their lives were changed or what they did after being healed. I could imagine that you might not want to tell too many people. Maybe they would question the validity of it or wonder, why did Jesus choose you? Or maybe you might be wondering the same thing about yourself, and so you don't want other people to think that too. I could also imagine, though, that it might be really powerful to be healed by Jesus, and you wouldn't want to keep it to yourself because your life has been changed and you want everyone to know about Jesus. But if you've always been on the margins of society, would others start suddenly accepting you? Which leads me to wonder, how do we accept people who are outcasts or marginalized? Now let's imagine that Pharisees who are holding on to their religion. They are trying to be devout. Pharisees sometimes get a bad rap, but they're just trying to be devout. They don't want Jesus breaking the rules. They believe they know what is best and how religion should be practiced. Does anyone know anybody like that in their life? How often, though, do we find ourselves judging others for the practice of their religion? We think we know what is best for everyone, and if they would only listen to us, they would have a better life. Or we think our relationship with God is stronger than theirs, and therefore we're better than them. Finally, let's imagine ourselves as the sinners and tax collectors. I admit that this might be the hardest to do, because we don't want to be the bad guys. It's common in life to look down on someone else for their behavior, but not recognize or acknowledge that same behavior in ourselves. We know we aren't perfect, though. We make mistakes, and because we are human, we are going to continue to make mistakes. We hurt people. We forget to be merciful and show grace. We hold standards of ourselves and other people that are unreasonable. We gossip. We struggle to love our neighbors as ourselves. We, all of us sitting here, are sinners in need of forgiveness, just like those in the Bible. The good news, though, Jesus still loves us. Jesus still comes to us and invites us to follow him. Jesus still provides healing for us, no matter what we've done, no matter what we think is going to be held against us. Jesus knows we aren't perfect and chooses to use us anyway. Jesus knows that we are all the same imperfect sinners who, if we recognize the humanity in each other, can truly love one another for who we all are, children of God. The thing is that we are a little of everyone in this story. We are the sinners and we are also the people in need of healing. We are sometimes up on our high horse, thinking we are better than others, and then we are brought back down into relationship with one another, and we try to live our lives like Jesus. Jesus calls us, no matter our background, even as sinners, because we can make a difference. We can be healers, sinners, healed ourselves, and still growing all at once. Like the saying goes, you never know what someone else is going through, so always be kind. May our faith be lived out in love and kindness so that others know that Jesus can use them too. Amen.